The rain had stopped just long enough to let the ash settle. Perched atop the shattered bones of a once proud tower, Sergeant Micah Voss adjusted the cheek rest on his rifle and squinted into the gloom. The skyline was a jagged ruin. Concrete husks, scorched antennas, and flickering digital ghosts of advertisements promising a better life, now broadcasting only static. Through the mist and soot, he could just make out the ghostly silhouettes of the alien mercenaries' 3 rooftops over, haloed in the unnatural blue glow of their armor. They were laughing. He couldn't hear them, not directly, but the translation broadcast came through loud and clear on the open bands, just like they wanted. Look at the primitive, polishing that antique. Is it loaded with rocks? Should we wave? No, he might consider that an act of war. As if one sniper could change anything. One man. Hilarious. Micah said nothing. He never did. He'd learned long ago that words had weight, and some were best saved until they mattered. His index finger brushed the safety on his rifle. Still on. Still waiting. The green light hadn't come. He leaned back on the scope and let his eyes drift across the battlefield below. The streets were a swamp of debris and shallow fires. The occasional glint of shifting metal betrayed movement, drone patrols, scavenger bots, or worse. Even now, his spotter drone, low profile and masked by electromagnetic scatter, hovered a few hundred meters away, silent and unseen. He hadn't checked the feed in over an hour. He didn't need to. This wasn't about the city anymore. This was about the rooftop. The mercs were Bracken, the elite of elite, hired muscle for a conquering force that didn't like to get its hands dirty. Their armor ran with shimmering tracer veins, like bioluminescent snakes under glass. They moved with the confidence of species who never had to fear retaliation. They'd torn through cities across 4 continents in less than a year, brushing aside military resistance with calculated ease. Humanity's main forces had retreated or been absorbed into the scattered, desperate holdouts that remained. But Micah Voss had never been part of the main force. His orders were simple. Hold the line, spot for command, wait for authorization. The rifle he cradled was no museum piece. It was rail-modified, anti-material rated, and bore the etchings of every confirmed kill he made in 23 years of silent warfare. The Bracken didn't know his name. They didn't know what he'd done on Kepler Ridge, or how long he'd lain still in the tundra of Norgrad Pass, waiting 6 days to take a single shot that changed an entire front. All they saw was a man alone with a long gun. That suited him fine. In the distant haze, one of the mercs raised a hand and mimed a salute, mocking. Another pretended to recoil, staggering dramatically as if Micah's stare had knocked him back. Their laughter spilled across the open frequencies again, this time with a drawn-out howl meant to simulate human voices in pain. Micah exhaled slowly, letting the breath slide through his nose. His heartbeat stayed even. His eye returned to the scope. He didn't need to feel anger. He needed to feel distance. He adjusted for wind, even though there was barely any. Old habit. The scope reticle glowed a soft crimson, target shapes shifting and aligning. The lead merc, the one with the jagged shoulder pauldron and constant smirk, leaned on the rooftop's edge, weapon slung lazily over his back. Poor creature. He's still waiting for orders. Micah blinked. The retinal HUD shimmered in response, confirming no new directives. Still no green light. He could squeeze the trigger now, eliminate their leader and scatter the others. But protocol was everything. Not because he believed the brass would swoop in to save him, but because when the real moment came, he wanted it to matter. Every ounce of mockery they flung across the airwaves, every cruel snort of superiority, would be paid for in time. And when it was, no one would laugh. He drank a swallow from his hydration tube, eyes still on the target. The water tasted of plastic and copper. Standard. Everything in this war had become standard. A quiet beep interrupted his concentration. One long tone, low and pulsing. His secondary scope switched to thermal. In the building below the Bracken, movement. Small clusters. Probably a ground patrol prepping to sweep west. If they kept to their pattern, they'd ascend to the mid-floors to secure line of sight before nightfall. That put them 40 minutes from his position. He tagged them anyway, storing coordinates in his wrist module. He could have moved. He could have relocated hours ago. But the mercs had stayed, and so had he. It wasn't just stubbornness. It was intent. They were watching him, and he wanted them to. Another flash across the scope. This time, the mercs had raised a flag, bright orange, stitched with some alien glyph that translated roughly to dominance. It snapped in the dusty wind, obscene in its implication. Micah smiled just barely. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small strip of cloth. Folded a dozen times. He unfolded it with slow reverence, hands practiced, and held it up just enough to catch the fading sunlight. Earth's old flag, frayed, stained but whole. He clipped it to the corner of the scope mount, where it fluttered silently. There were no words for what that flag meant. Not anymore. But sometimes a message didn't need translation. The mercs noticed. The smirks faltered. The salute stopped. Micah didn't lower the flag. He spoke for the first time in hours, voice rasping through a dry throat, into his private calm, still waiting. Command didn't answer, but that was fine. They would. When the time was right, they would send the signal. Until then, he would wait. Because the one thing the Bracken never understood was that humans didn't always need numbers or tech or overwhelming force. Sometimes, all it took was one man, one rifle, one rooftop, and a reason. They'd given him plenty. 30 minutes passed. The sun slipped behind the smog-laced skyline, casting long shadows that deepened the desolation below. Sergeant Micah Voss remained motionless, his body molded to the rooftop's broken surface, like a fossil pressed into stone. His breath misted faintly in the thickening chill, and still the green light had not come. The bracken across the gap had grown bolder. Their mockery was no longer performative. It was strategic. They were testing him, pushing the line, daring him to act outside his leash. The lead merc, the one Micah had mentally tagged Smirk, now stood openly on the edge, arms folded across his chest. His armor pulsed with that cold bioluminescent energy, and his helmet was retracted to reveal a pale face etched with symmetrical scars. An honor design Micah knew. Every line represented a kill. There were dozens. Still, Micah said nothing, moved nothing. His finger rested lightly on the trigger well, not tense, but aware. Ready. Through the comm link, static hummed like a persistent insect, broken only by the occasional encrypted pulse from command. No words. No updates. Just silence dressed in protocol. And then it changed. A tone short, clipped, unmistakable. 2 chirps, then a burst of data. His HUD flared green in the top left corner. The message was brief. Authorization granted. Priority target, Bracken Field Captain. Initiate with extreme prejudice. The green light. Micah didn't smile. There was no rush of vindication, no triumphant music rising in his mind. There was only the breath he exhaled, long, steady, and the faint whisper of muscle tightening with purpose. He adjusted the rifle scope with a flick of his thumb, refining the range. The crosshairs settled over Smirk's temple. Distance, 943 meters. Wind, negligible. Armor, Class 7 but exposed. Target profile, high value, high command, likely reinforced by immediate response teams upon engagement. He squeezed the trigger. The shot wasn't loud. A low thrum, a sharp pulse. The recoil was muted by the weapon's dampeners. But across the gap, the result was anything but quiet. The Bracken captain's head snapped sideways with unnatural speed, the kinetic slug tearing through bone and matter and spraying bioluminescent mist into the twilight. Smirk dropped. The rooftop erupted into chaos. Micah was already moving. He rolled from his position, rifle slung across his back, and sprinted to the adjacent ledge. Below him, the street writhed with sudden energy. Mercenary squads mobilizing, drones leaping into formation, chatter flooding the open bands in panic bursts. He fired. One confirmed down. Field Captain Toreth. He's dead. Locate the shooter. Thermal scans now. Sector 7-1. Rooftops. Possible human combatant. Micah didn't linger. He dove into the shattered stairwell behind him, boots striking ash-coated steps with trained precision. The building was a hollow carcass of its former self. Charred desks, mangled chairs, rust-streaked terminals. He moved through it like smoke, silent and certain, heading downward. He reached the second floor and paused. Through a shattered window, he could see the bracken scrambling. Two of them had crossed the rooftop, where Smirk had fallen. One knelt beside the body. The other scanned the horizon, weapon raised. They were disoriented. Good. Micah activated his wrist module. The drone he left hovering miles away blinked to life, suddenly rerouted, swooping low in a wide arc behind the enemy's perimeter. As it moved, it dropped 3 microcharges along the route. Standard pulse-blind devices, designed not to kill, but to confuse. On his HUD, 3 new flares bloomed in red. The Bracken responded instantly, exactly as trained. 3 teams broke formation, veering off toward the false signals, their formation fracturing. One remained near the captain's corpse, motionless. Micah marked him. Not just another soldier. This one had command posture, rigid, composed. His armor bore a dark crest, like a spider's leg split across a silver plate. He hadn't moved when the others scrambled. Second in command. Micah returned his rifle and took position near the window, balancing the weapon on a rusted filing cabinet. The target stood still, examining the corpse of the fallen leader. No panic, just calculation. Micah fired again. This time, the target moved at the last second, just enough. The round clipped the shoulder plate and spun the Merc off balance, armor flaring in protest. Not a kill. He cursed under his breath and ducked back as return fire lit the space around him. The Bracken had his position now. Shards of concrete erupted from the walls, and heat rounds seared through the floor, melting rebar. But it didn't matter. He'd done what he came to do. He pulled a grenade from his belt, thumbed the charge, and tossed it through the window. It sailed cleanly into the alley below, landing between 2 converging squads. The detonation wasn't spectacular, but the EM pulse blinded half their sensors for 10 seconds. In combat, 10 seconds was forever. Micah dropped through a service hatch and vanished into the building's lower levels. As he ran, breath tight in his chest, he tapped into the encrypted line again. Target down. 1 confirmed, 1 wounded. Relocating to Echo Point. A voice crackled to life in his ear for the first time in days. Copy that, Voss. You just lit the match. They'll be coming. Micah emerged into an underground corridor littered with collapsed ducting and the stench of rot. Somewhere ahead, a flicker of emergency lighting revealed the crude graffiti of the resistance, a clenched fist over a burning skyline. He let his hand brush the wall as he passed. Let them come, he thought. Let them chase shadows. He'd given them a taste of fear, and now they would have to live with it. And soon they'd learn the one truth no alien army had yet understood. The more you corner humanity, the sharper its edge became. The tunnels beneath the city were a graveyard of forgotten infrastructure. Once, they had ferried power and water through humming arteries. Now, they groaned under the weight of crumbling civilization. Micah Voss moved through them with disciplined quiet, boots barely brushing the soot-caked ground. Every 20 meters, he paused. Listened, checked his flank. The Bracken were relentless, but they weren't subtle, not in the underways. Behind him, the firefight above had dissolved into a frenzy. He could still hear the distant thumps of blast rounds and the sharp static of shouted orders broadcast across open channels. The kill had rattled them more than command anticipated. Good. A disoriented enemy was a vulnerable one, but Micah knew better than to celebrate. The most dangerous beast is the one that believes it's been wounded unfairly. Ahead, pale blue light filtered through a break in the concrete. A maintenance hatch, cracked open, pulsed with the weak hum of an energy beacon. He knelt, scanned for traps, and slipped through. He emerged in an old metro platform, derelict but partially reclaimed. Half buried in rubble, a resistance outpost flickered to life at his approach. Crude panels glowed green. A turret swiveled briefly before tagging him friendly. Echo Point. 2 figures stepped into the light. One was lean and wiry, barely older than 20, with a rifle too big for his frame. The other was taller, broader, and wore the remnants of a colonel's uniform beneath layered scavenger armor. Voss, the older one said, his voice a deep rasp. They're awake now. Micah nodded. So I've noticed. Colonel Darren Shaw had once led a battalion on Mars Gate during the first pushback. Now he oversaw Echo Sector, one of the last coordinated resistance clusters in the region. He motioned for Micah to follow, leading him down a narrow corridor past sleeping bodies, ammo crates, and jury-rigged terminals. The hum of whispered conversations filtered to the walls. Updates, rumors, prayers. "They've locked down 6 blocks," Shaw said. "Drones in a wide grid. They're combing for heat, movement, EM signals. You stirred the hive." "I was authorized," Micah replied simply. Wasn't questioning that. Shaw opened a door with a thumbprint and retinal scan. Inside was a cramped operations room, 3 monitors, a hardline uplink, and a flickering schematic of the city overlaid with pulsing red sectors. "Just letting you know how loud the bees are buzzing." Micah stepped in, unslung his rifle, and laid it on the table. One of the techs glanced up, startled, then quickly resumed tapping commands. The schematic showed the city sliced into sectors, each pulsing with escalating activity. But in Sector 71, the rooftop, the origin point, there was a blinking icon marked confirmed. HVD Kia. "You got their captain clean," Shaw said, gesturing to the map. Second in command was airlifted out 2 clicks east. "He's breathing, but he won't fight again for a while. You destabilize their whole unit structure. Intel says the Bracken don't respond well to sudden decapitation." "Good," Micah muttered. "Keep cutting heads." Shaw raised an eyebrow. "You expecting to get more green lights?" Micah didn't answer immediately. He studied the map instead, then pointed to a cluster of zones surrounding the Bracken forward base. "They're not retreating. They're digging in. That means either reinforcement or retaliation." "Both, likely," Shaw agreed. "And we're light on both ammo and morale." Micah turned his attention to a side terminal, pulling up the last recon drone footage. It showed the Bracken gathering in formation, recalibrating their scanners. But there was something else, something not standard. At the edge of the screen, a new silhouette appeared. Taller, broader, heavily armored, but its movements were fluid, deliberate. It didn't shimmer like the others. It absorbed light. "Pause. Zoom," Micah said. The tech complied. The image clarified. A new unit type, unfamiliar. No known markers. It stood among the others like a wolf among hounds. "That's not a merc," Micah said. "No," Shaw replied grimly. "That's command." They looked at each other in silence for a beat. Then Shaw added, "We've seen that type once before, during the Tehran fallback. It's not just muscle. It's surgical, purpose-built. They don't mock. They hunt." Micah leaned on the table, jaw clenched. "Then it's coming for me." "Exactly," Shaw confirmed. "Which gives us 2 options. Extract you before they lock the net, or use you as bait and take a shot at the handler." Micah stared at the screen, then glanced at the blinking green light still active on his HUD. The authorization hadn't timed out yet. That meant command was still watching, still waiting. He weighed the options, each one lined with risk and blood. But he already knew his answer. "I stay," he said. "They think they're in control. Let's let them believe it for a little longer." Shaw didn't argue. He respected those who made decisions cleanly. "Then we'll get you a new perch." Micah retrieved his rifle, ran a finger along the edge of the barrel. The time for hiding had passed. Now came the game of misdirection, of shadows and whispers and precision violence. They'd sent something new for him, something designed not to underestimate. Good. That meant the rules had changed. And if the Bracken thought the rooftop sniper was their only threat, they'd soon learn what happened when humans started writing new rules of their own. The decoy sniper nest was positioned in the skeletal frame of an unfinished high-rise, 10 stories above ground level and half-shrouded in the smoke of controlled fires. Micah Voss had taken 3 hours to build it with his own hands, crafting the illusion of a lived-in post. Shell casings, body heat residue, a dummy rifle with enough electronic signature to draw scan. It was bait, nothing more. But like any good lure, it had to smell real. The real nest was across the boulevard, nestled in the bowels of a collapsed parking structure. Dark, humid, silent. From this vantage, Micah had line of sight on 3 different Bracken entry paths. He hadn't moved in hours. Not once. His body had become an extension of the rubble. Even his breath came in slow, measured draws, the rhythm of a man who had taught himself patience in war. Through the scope, the first hunter arrived. It wasn't armored like a standard bracken. This one moved with almost predatory grace. Less machine, more organism. Its armor was matte black, plated in narrow layers that shifted as it walked. The helmet had no visor, no eyes, only a smooth, faceless curve. Micah could see no insignia, no rank, no tells. It was what Shaw had warned him about, a command predator. It paused at the dummy nest, scanning the area without gesture. No drones, no backup. It didn't need them. Micah watched it crouch, touched the parapet where the fake rifle sat. It tilted its head, almost in curiosity, then stood again and looked directly across the street, straight at Micah's position. But it didn't move. Micah's pulse didn't rise. He adjusted his aim, crosshairs drifting across the center of the figure's chest. The shot wouldn't kill it. He knew that already. But it would start the conversation. He squeezed. The impact was precise. The kinetic round struck center mass, and the figure staggered backward, momentum carrying it into the stairwell behind it. Dust rose. Concrete groaned. Silence followed. Micah didn't celebrate. He shifted scope angle, scanning for movement, for misdirection. A full minute passed. Then a shadow emerged, not from the building, but from the alley 2 blocks west. A second figure. Identical. A copy. Micah's grip tightened. The bracken hadn't sent a hunter. They'd sent a pair. He moved quickly now, shifting position deeper into the structure. No longer concealed, only shielded. He activated his uplink. Echo, this is Voss. Confirmed 2 command predators. One engaged, one flanking, repositioning. Shaw's voice came in terse and fast. Acknowledged. Fall back to grid 9. Resistance team moving to intercept. No time, Micah replied, already on the move. They're not here for the network. They're here for me. He dropped 2 floors, landing hard on the rubble below. Pain jolted up his legs, but he kept moving. The parking structure groaned above him. Another moment, and it would become a death trap. Behind him, the first predator reappeared. It walked now, not rushed. A hunter confident the prey had nowhere left to run. Micah ducked into a side hallway and slammed the emergency seal shut behind him. He planted 2 thermite charges against the wall and kept running. 30 meters, then the charges went off. The hallway collapsed in a hail of steel and fire. Not enough to kill the thing, but enough to delay it. He reached the lower exit and emerged into the Undercity once more. This time, he didn't run for cover. He stopped. The second predator was already there, blocking the path. It made no sound. Its body was coated in dust, and its right shoulder sparked faintly where synthetic muscle had been exposed. Micah raised his rifle, but the predator didn't attack. Instead, it spoke. The voice wasn't Bracken. It wasn't human. It was a modulation, like multiple languages woven together into one flat note. You are not the last, only the loudest. Micah didn't reply. He fired. The round hit the creature square in the chest again, staggering it. But this time, it didn't fall. It advanced. Micah backpedaled, drew a concussion grenade, and threw. The blast lit the corridor with a white flare. The predator reeled, momentarily blinded, and Micah used a distraction a flank left into a derelict power junction chamber. He slid across rusted floor panels, firing 3 times in quick succession as the second hunter entered behind him. It ducked the first shot, tanked the second, and leapt into the air just before third. Micah dug beneath it, scrambled behind an old transformer unit, and drew his backup pistol. 10 seconds. That's all he needed. He pulled a remote detonator from his belt and primed the fallback charge built into the core of the old junction, placed there 2 weeks prior as a failsafe. The predator moved toward him, silent, deliberate. Micah waited until it was within 5 meters. Then he hit the trigger. The explosion wasn't elegant. It ripped through the power chamber in a wave of white-hot plasma, melting steel and fire blasting the air into thunder. The walls collapsed inward. The roof came down. For a heartbeat, the world vanished in noise and heat and ash. When Micah pulled himself in the wreckage, bleeding and half-deaf, there was no sign of the predator, only silence. Shaw's voice crackled through the comm again. "Voss! Report. Do you copy?" He coughed, tasted blood, and leaned against a broken girder. "I'm here," he rasped. "They're not indestructible. Status: 1 down. Second unconfirmed. I'm heading to blackout zone." "Copy." You shook the whole quadrant. "They'll feel this." Micah looked up, eyes narrowing as the sun finally began to rise above the city's jagged silhouette. Let them come. Let them send more. He'd learned what they feared, and it wasn't numbers. It was resolve. It was the human who stayed when logic said run, the one who turned every kill into a message. And Micah Voss had just started writing his.